Okay, now we're gonna look at how sessions work in web applications. So, as I've mentioned before, HTTP is stateless. That means every time your browser sends a request to a server, the server doesn't know who you are. There's just no way for the server to know just by your request. So, since HTTP is stateless, the web application developer has to somehow find a way to identify every user. Because if you want to log into a website, for example, the website needs to know who you are in order to show you what it needs to show you. So that is usually done via a unique session ID. That means the web application developer or the web application backend somehow sets a session ID in your browser that is submitted via every request, and with this unique ID it knows who you are. As a bonus exercise, this is how sessions work in the EFA system that I showed you earlier of the university. If you want, you can try to find out how this session ID is calculated in EFA, which is not ideal. Okay, so we have this unique session ID per user. Now we need a way for the browser to transmit this session ID on every request. We could do this with get parameters, which is obviously a bad idea. For example, because it would show up in the referrer. If you click a link on a website, usually the target website that you visit after the click gets the referrer information. That means your browser tells the website where it came from. So if in the get parameter there's a session ID, the owner of this website you're visiting now obviously can see your session ID, which is bad. Session ID would also get stored in history, which might be bad, and it is shown in the browser bar, which is bad because if somebody stands behind you, he can see your session ID. Okay, you could transfer it via post parameter, which is annoying because you have to carry it from view to view. Every time you click on a link, it has to set up a post request. What is usually done is the session ID is transferred via cookie. Sometimes web applications have a fallback. If cookies are disabled in the browser, they switch back to get parameters. So what is a cookie? Well, it's very simple. Cookie is essentially a small text key value pair, small text file that is stored in your browser. So if you do a request, the web server sets a small text information on your web browser. How does that work? Well, I did a curl request here to a banking website, and in the answer, in the response from the web server, there's a header set called setCookie. And the setCookie header has a key value pair. The key here is JSessionID, and the value is some random value. So after my browser has received this header, it sets a cookie for this website here, and every time I visit the website with my browser, it sets along this cookie. So the usual request flow is browser visits web server talks to backend, the backend creates a unique session ID and returns a cookie with this unique session ID with a set cookie header. So how does the web application work? Well, first we will mainly look at PHP code in the slides. That is because with PHP we can do very concise, very short code snippets, which is important for slides. The underlying principles work the same in every programming language. So your knowledge from these code snippets can be transferred to the other languages as well. And in our tasks, we'll have different kinds of code, as you will see. So what happens in this code snippet, we have this function session start that PHP offers to application developers that essentially sets this cookie, creates a unique session ID and sets this cookie. Or if a cookie is already set, it connects your browser to this specific session. Then I have this magic variable called $_session where I can store keys in. So I store the key fev color and set it to green. I store the key fev animal and set it to cat. So what happens now is the PHP interpreter has a session store at hand, and every time a browser makes a request with a valid cookie set that has a session ID, the PHP interpreter looks in this session store, and then in the session store it finds these values, for example my favorite color and my favorite animal, and then it can use this information to create a dynamic document and send it back to the web server, and the web server sends it back to the browser. So every time a browser comes with a valid session ID, PHP knows who you are because it can look in its session store where I have stored, for example, favorite color, favorite animal as a web developer.